Jessica sat in her small apartment in an old apartment building, browsing through classified ads in a newspaper, searching for any kind of work. Her life had taken a drastic turn lately when her fiancé died. Carlos was also 26 years old, and he worked as a construction worker. The young couple planned to get married next month. Jessica grew up in an orphanage, so she has no one to help her. Carlos's parents were representatives of the working class and also couldn't help their son with the wedding. But nevertheless, the young couple were going to celebrate it properly. After the registry office, they planned to have a photo session and then go to a cafe where their guests would already be waiting for them. To cover all expenses, Carlos took on additional shifts at work. As for Jessica, in the last 6 months, she had not officially worked anywhere. Her fiancé insisted that she focus solely on housekeeping, and the girl agreed. "After all, I am a man," Carlos said firmly, "so I should also be the breadwinner in our family. And by the way, Diego Miera promised to promote me next month. I'll finish this project and then maybe I'll rise to the position of foreman. Then, Jessica, our lives will be entirely different." "What are you talking about, Carlos?" Jessica replied. "You know perfectly well that I don't need a lot. I'm already happy just because we're together." The couple had been living together for almost a year, and during that time, they had never quarrelled and agreed on everything. But Carlos wanted more from life, and Jessica, being a wise girl, supported her future husband and did not interfere with his endeavours. However, a month ago, Carlos died in an accident. The main crane broke down and fell on the residential trailer where Jessica's fiancé was located. Everything happened too quickly, and no one could have stopped the huge falling structure. When they called Jessica and told her that her fiancé had died, she fell into a terrible hysteria. She screamed, cried, howled and shouted. The pain that pierced her entire body, from the top of her head to the very tips of her toes, was so strong that she wanted to leave this world with Carlos. After her emotions subsided for a while, Jessica went straight to the construction site to figure out what had happened. However, to her surprise, the boss of her fiancé did not want to acknowledge his guilt. On the contrary, he treated the girl very rudely. "Why did you come here, dear?" he asked, brazenly staring her in the eye. "It's entirely your fault, and you are responsible for all the incidents," Jessica said, bewildered. "Carlos had already told me that you save on equipment. Half of your cranes are worn-out junk, but you still use them, risking the lives of other people. This is prosecutable." Diego Miera slowly rose from his armchair and looked menacingly at the bride of the deceased construction worker. "Ah," he said nasally, "so you need money from me then? I suppose you're counting on compensation for your Carlos, right? Here it is." The man made an obscene gesture in front of the girl's face and continued, "Here's your compensation. Got it? Who do you think you are? You think that if you threatened me with the police, I'd rush to organise a lavish funeral for your fiancé?" Jessica stood in front of him as if she had been spit upon. She had never been looked at with such contempt before. "How can you not be ashamed of yourself, Mr. Miera?" Jessica could only squeeze herself. Her voice was hoarse from tears. "Carlos spent days and nights on your damned construction site just to make sure that your facility was completed on time." "Stop, please! That nonsense! Get out of here! Blessed one! And remember, if you try to tell the cops anything about this case, you'll regret it. I have some connections." Diego Miera wagged his finger at Jessica, but she didn't see it anymore. The girl, barely holding back her tears, left the construction site, having noticed the remains of the crane under which her fiancé died. Returning home from the construction site that day, Jessica cried until the evening and then fell into a disturbing and shaky sleep. The money for the funeral was taken from the amount that she and Carlos had saved for their wedding, and she was also helped by Carlos's colleagues on the construction site. The men contributed as much as they could. The groom's parents wept bitterly as they saw their son's body being lowered into the cold ground. Jessica, who by that time had cried her eyes out, held on through the whole ceremony with all her might. But when it was time to go for the wake, the girl still couldn't stand it and burst into tears. A month passed after the funeral when Jessica had another shock. Feeling strange nausea in the morning, Jessica did a test just in case and was amazed when she saw 2 streaks. Jessica was shocked. It turned out that her beloved Carlos had given her one last gift before his death. Of course, termination was out of the question. Jessica wanted the child from her beloved man and was ready to do whatever it took to give the baby everything it needed. However, job prospects in her town were slim, and when potential employers found out she was pregnant, they always pointed her out the door. So Jessica, who until that moment had only worked as a sales assistant in a clothing store, had to look for other options. While looking through a free newspaper with ads, the girl came across a vacancy for a cleaner at a kindergarten. Despite her short-term prospects, Jessica took a chance to try her luck and get this job. Fortunately, luck was on her side. The kindergarten urgently needed a cleaner, and the director agreed to take Jessica without inquiring about her situation. So, there were grey workdays ahead. Jessica washed floors, swept and vacuumed spacious playrooms, and maintained order in the locker room and hall. The mother-to-be had work enough to do. None of the staff members bothered her, but they also didn't show her any sympathy. No matter what anyone says, being a cleaner now carries the stigma of being an outcast, so Jessica was treated at best with indifference. However, the girl never complained. She simply wanted to do her job as soon as possible and go home without talking to anyone. In the evenings when she returned to her shabby tiny apartment with a draft from every crevice, Jessica was exhausted. She tried not to listen to the screams of her alcoholic neighbours for the rest of the evening. This apartment was given to her right after she left the orphanage. The state allocated it to her, and it was where Jessica lived with Carlos until the tragedy happened to him. And one day, Jessica found in the locker room of the kindergarten a birth certificate that had been lost by someone. When Jessica opened the certificate, she saw the name Debbie Shannon. She had been working in the kindergarten for a month by then, so she knew most of the children by name. Debbie, a lovely red-haired girl, was kind and joyful, and always greeted Jessica when they met. Jessica put the certificate in her locker thinking, "Tomorrow I'll give it to the owner." The following day, Jessica waited for Debbie's stepmother to come and pick her up. Jessica could easily tell that it was a stepmother from her disdainful behaviour towards the child. The stepmother's name was Candice. She brought and took the girl from kindergarten every day, never forgetting to flaunt her new, indecently short dress or her mind-boggling makeup on her face. "Hello, I found that yesterday. It's yours," Jessica said, holding out the birth certificate to Candice. "Oh, thank you," said Candice, flashing her snow-white teeth. "Apparently it fell out of my purse when I was packing my daughter's things." Despite her kind words, the woman's smile was nothing like that of a caring mother. A second later, Candice took out a large bill from her purse and handed it to the cleaning lady. "Consider it my thanks for your vigilance and help," she said with a smile. "Oh, you owe me nothing. That's what anyone would do if they were me," Jessica replied shyly. "Oh, dear, don't argue with me. Take it," Candice insisted, thrusting the money into Jessica's pocket. What a foolish thing to refuse money. Do you think I can't see that you need it now?" The young rich woman scrutinized the cleaning lady from head to toe, then suddenly suggested, "Listen, don't you want to work for me?" "What do you mean?" Jessica asked, not understanding. "I have an offer for you," Candace explained. "My husband needs a caregiver. He lost his eyesight not so long ago. Partially though, but still, he's as helpless as a kitten. He can't go down the stairs or take a walk outside." "I sympathize with you," Jessica responded. "He wants to have an operation. He's distressed sick," Candace continued. "Doctors say that there's a chance he'll completely see again, but I'm not sure. I'll pay you a good salary if you can take care of him properly. Well, do you agree?" Jessica thought that, on the one hand, she didn't really want to be under the same roof as this arrogant rich woman, but on the other hand, she would have a real opportunity to earn a large sum of money, which she needed for the baby. "I should try. It's not every day that I get a chance like this," she thought, and she agreed. "Well done." Candace smiled broadly. "I'll send a car for you tomorrow morning. Pack your things. You'll be living at our house." Jessica was afraid to quit kindergarten at once. Who knew how it would work out in the house of the rich? Maybe she wouldn't suit them. Therefore, Jessica took a couple of weeks' vacation from work at her own expense and hurried home to get ready for the move. When Jessica arrived at Candace's mansion, she involuntarily gasped with admiration. The huge, 3-story building looked more like a fairy tale castle than an ordinary house. "Will you be my new nanny?" Debbie asked curiously. "Not exactly, dear. Rather, I will help your father while he is ill," Jessica answered, smiling at the girl. Paul Shannon, Debbie's father, turned out to be a pleasant man who looked a little over 35 years old. His bright red hair stood out against the background of Candace's unnaturally bleached hair. "It's clear at once why his daughter is such a redhead," Jessica thought to herself, looking at the owner of the house. The businessman wore special dark glasses to conceal his vision problems. He sat in the sitting room in an armchair, holding a long, thin cane for the blind to help him get around. He waited patiently for his new caregiver to be brought to him. "Candace, read me a book, please." Debbie jumped up to her stepmother, but the beautiful blonde rudely waved the girl away. "Can't you see I'm busy? Look at the pictures or read it yourself. I don't have time for you," she bellowed at her. Jessica pressed her lips. She was upset to see such a blatant attitude towards the girl. But what could she do? "Well, please, please," the girl asked, continuing to tug her stepmother's sleeve. "Why are you so annoying, huh?" Candace pulled her arm out. "You are wicked," Debbie shouted in her heart and ran to her room. "She's no good at all. A terribly capricious child," said Candace, adjusting her jacket. "Come with me. I'll introduce you to my husband, Paul." Jessica, who had only seen him from afar until now, was a little embarrassed when Candace led her to the chair and introduced her to her husband. "I'm overjoyed that you agreed to help me," Paul said, extending his broad palm to Jessica. "I hope it won't take long. The doctor said that the operation can be carried out in a couple of months." Candace grimaced when she heard this, as if she had eaten something sour. "Let's not think so far ahead, dear," she said in a sweet and luscious voice. "Now, the main thing is to make you feel confident again, moving around the house. That's why I've hired a nurse for you." "Then I think you won't mind if Jessica helps me up to my room," Paul answered calmly, and then put his hand in Jessica's. She obeyed silently. "I want you to know this mansion like the back of your hand, Jessica," said the businessman, as the girl began to climb the stairs with him. "It depends on how soon I can get used to my present position. Who knows if Candace is right, and this operation will not help me." Jessica looked at her ward with sympathy and shook her head negatively. "Don't think about it so negatively, Paul. Everything will definitely be fine, and you will be able to see your daughter and wife again. It can't be otherwise." The businessman stopped on the step, turned his head to Jessica, and said with some surprise, "Thank you, Jessica. You are very kind." For the last few years before he went blind, Paul went to the same place every day, to the cemetery where Susan, his first wife, and Debbie's mother was buried. "Susan," he often said, looking at the portrait of his late wife, "I promise that I will never forget about you. Forgive me, my love." The businessman wiped away unsolicited tears from his face, which every time came to his eyes when he remembered his Susan. Not a day passed that Paul did not blame himself for what happened to his wife. It seemed to him that if he had been more attentive and caring, Susan's death could have been avoided. Paul and Susan had long dreamed of having a child, but since their marriage, Susan had not been able to conceive. Finally, after almost 4 years, Susan managed to get pregnant. After learning about it, the businessman was ready to carry her in his arms. When they were told that they were expecting a daughter, he immediately gave his wife a gorgeous necklace of natural pearls. "I want our girl to be as beautiful as these pearls." Paul said this with admiration, looking at his beloved wife. The pregnancy was going well, and the husband and wife, with increasing excitement, looked at the calendar, waiting for the day when Susan was to give birth. Close to that day, the young woman started having contractions, and Paul immediately took her to the hospital. Throughout the day, Paul was on edge, waiting for a call from the hospital. He called countless times but received no explanation. Unable to wait any longer, he rushed to the hospital. But on the way, he received a phone call from the duty nurse in the maternity ward. "Good evening, Mr. Shannon. This is the duty nurse of the maternity ward." "Hi, how is Susan? Is she all right? And my daughter, how is she?" impatiently asked the businessman. However, there was a heavy silence on the phone for a few seconds. "Why are you silent? Hello?" "Mr. Shannon, the thing is, you'd better come. Your wife, she's dead." Without looking at the road, Paul flew to the hospital, ignoring traffic lights in a desperate attempt to stop the passing of his infinitely beloved wife. Paul stood in the emergency room of the clinic and listened to the explanations of the surgeon who delivered Susan. "Your wife had a very narrow pelvis, so we had to perform a cesarean to deliver the baby," the doctor said. "But unexpectedly, there was heavy bleeding. Susan's blood coagulation was very low. I'm sorry, Mr. Shannon. We really did everything we could. Fortunately, your daughter turned out to be completely healthy. You will be able to pick her up in a few days. Please accept my sincere condolences." The surgeon said something else, but it did not matter to the businessman. Without listening to the doctor, he went out on stiff legs to the porch of the clinic, sat down on a bench, and gave vent to his grief. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he was unable to stop them. How was it possible that his one and only Susan had died? They had been so looking forward to the birth of their daughter, believing that it would change their lives and fill them with new happiness. Other nurses and doctors, seeing the state of the inconsolable widower, tried not to disturb him. They bypassed the man, giving him the opportunity to mourn his beloved wife. 2 weeks later, the businessman took his tiny daughter from the maternity ward and left her in the care of his mother. Paul was then hit with depression, which knocked him out of his routine for a long time and prevented him from devoting enough time to his child. Thankfully, his mother was there for him and helped him cope with the grief and, in a new way, looking at the meaning of his own life. From then on, Paul lived solely for the sake of his daughter, only she in the business, which he immersed himself in with his head for the next 4 years, helped him partially cope with the pain of losing his beloved wife. His business was growing, gaining momentum, and he had less and less spare time for his daughter. Meanwhile, the girl needed a good upbringing. When Debbie turned 4 years old, Paul considered hiring a nanny. His mother was already too old and she had serious health problems. The man realized that it would be much better for Debbie to be brought up at home, in the family circle, rather than in a kindergarten among complete strangers. Turning to a recruitment agency, Paul faced another problem. As it turned out, there were so many applicants for the role of nanny that choosing the best one was still quite a task. After reviewing 24 women, the exhausted businessman chose a young and pretty Candice. She seemed sincere and wanted to be friends with his daughter, and Paul was impressed. From the very first days of her stay at the house, this spectacular beauty surrounded little Debbie with care and affection. The businessman was truly delighted with the nanny and grateful to her for treating his little girl as if she were her own. However, Paul did not even guess what was really on Candice's mind. Only his mother immediately suspected that the nanny was not who she pretended to be. In fact, in their first meeting, the experienced woman noticed a predatory glint in Candice's greenish-yellow eyes, like a snake. Candice appeared to be an angel when she was near Debbie, but as soon as she was alone with the businessman, her face changed instantly, revealing a very cunning and calculating person. Mrs. Shannon repeatedly saw how Candice looked at her son with frank interest and guessed that Candice intended to get close to him using her little granddaughter. "Paul, Sonny, you should take a closer look at this Candice. I don't like her," Mrs. Shannon advised. But Paul only smiled slightly in response and asked, "What's wrong? Debbie loves her, and she does her job well. What displeases you?" But the elderly, wise woman only shook her head reproachfully and warned, "She has a bad heart. Believe me, she wants to take Susan's place." "Come on, what nonsense." Paul laughed then. "Candice does not interest me at all in this regard." Not much time passed, and Paul, who at first really treated the nanny coldly and aloofly, gave up under the charm of the young beauty. The passion emanating from this blonde captured the businessman like a turbulent maelstrom. The affair that erupted between them, like fire, led to a quick wedding. Mrs. Shannon opposed their relationship and tried to reason with her son several times, but it was all in vain. Paul was bewitched by Candice and refused to listen to anyone. After having a lavish wedding, the newlyweds went to the sea for their honeymoon. When they returned, the former nanny made it clear to her mother-in-law that she was the real mistress of the house. "You should change your anger for mercy, Mother. You cannot change anything. Paul is my husband now, and I am the mistress here. You better keep quiet if you do not want to spend the rest of your days in some remote home for the elderly. Believe me, I can arrange such a thing. Paul listens to me in everything." Mrs. Shannon was struck by the insolence of her daughter-in-law, but did not say anything. She realized that as long as her son was under the influence of this snake, it was pointless to tell him anything. Meanwhile, Candice became more and more enamored with the wealthy lifestyle and spent her husband's money without remorse on shopping, beauty salons, and expensive restaurants. The stepmother no longer interested her, and she persuaded her husband to send the girl to kindergarten. "Why is she always sitting at home?" Candice pouted her lips and asked Paul. "She's almost 5. It's time to get her into a normal environment. Kindergarten has excellent teachers and nannies, and the girl will quickly make new friends. And I'll have more spare time for you, honey," Candice said, wanting to get rid of the annoying stepdaughter. Meanwhile, the little girl did not understand why her kind nanny, who had married her father, suddenly became cold and angry. And soon her father listened to the convincing arguments of his second wife and agreed to send his daughter to kindergarten. Who knows, but Maybe the anxiety associated with her son's new wife was the cause of it. After that, Candice breathed a sigh of relief and began to put things in order in the mansion. She tried to get rid of everything that reminded Paul of his past life. And a little later, the businessman himself was involved in a terrible accident while returning from another business trip. He was not at fault. A drunk driver drove straight into oncoming traffic and crashed into Paul's car. In a fatal accident, it was Paul who suffered the most. Due to a severe head injury, the man almost completely lost his eyesight. Doctors assured him that it was a temporary phenomenon, but it would only become clear after Paul had undergone surgery. The businessman himself doubted. He then believed that he would see again, then fell into despair. Candice, however, did not miss the opportunity to add fuel to the fire of his desperation. The young wife, all the time, hinted that her husband would be wearing the sunglasses for the rest of his life, and therefore it would be good to leave the business to her, just in case. Paul quickly realized that he had made a mistake in marrying the former nanny. Only now had he discovered what he had not noticed before because of Candice's beauty. By her voice and intonations, as well as by Candice's behaviour, the man realized that she never loved him and married him solely for money. After a week of Jessica's work in a new house, little Debbie completely loved the kind and sympathetic woman who was always ready to play with her or read a fairy tale to her before bedtime. Gradually, Jessica began to come to the conclusion that Paul and Candice were not in the best of relationships. Jessica helped the businessman with almost everything that concerned movement around the house and outside it, and she also looked after Paul in everyday life. She helped him choose this or that tie, sorted his clothes by colour, and so on. Meanwhile, for some strange reason, the voice of this sweet and genuinely kind girl seemed very familiar to Paul. On the other hand, aren't there many similar voices in life? In the end, the businessman stopped paying much attention to it, writing it all off to his own impressionability caused by blindness. Jessica noticed that Candice tried to destroy any memory of her husband's first wife. She burned all the photos of Susan and threw away or sold all her things and jewellery. The nurse thought it was the banal selfishness of a woman who wanted to be the sole owner of the mansion. Candice was so anxious to get rid of any memory of Susan that she almost immediately forgot what she looked like. Thankfully for such a shallow person as Candice was, it was easy. But most of all, Jessica was upset by the fact that Debbie's stepmother treated her badly. The little girl always left Candice's room in tears, and once Jessica even heard how Candice deliberately humiliated Debbie and scared her so that she would send the poor girl to a closed women's boarding school. No wonder this woman lost the girl's birth certificate, Jessica thought to herself. She wants to get rid of her. And then Jessica started to suspect that Candice had a lover. She often saw how she closed herself in the kitchen or bathroom and talked to someone on the phone, sounding at the same time as a March cat. However, Jessica realized that she had no right to interfere in other people's relationships. She was only a caregiver, and her business was to help her blind master. A little more time passed, and Paul was scheduled for an operation. Although Candice was against the fact that her husband, as she put it, was being exposed to unnecessary risk, the businessman still went to the operating table. Fortunately, everything went well, and for the next 2 weeks, the man walked with a special bandage, providing optimal healing of the tissues. When the bandage was removed and he arrived home, he involuntarily froze on the spot, seeing Jessica in front of him. "Susan," he could only whisper, almost fainting. "But how is that possible? You died 5 years ago." Jessica didn't understand anything and only had time to pick up the businessman, who had fallen to the floor in shock. "Paul, what's the matter with you?" she exclaimed in horror. "Hold on, I'll call an ambulance." "Jessica, it's all right," the businessman told her. "Just help me sit down and listen to me." After Paul was placed on the sofa, he looked at his nurse in amazement. It was hard for him to believe that all this time he was being looked after by an exact copy of his late wife. "No, it can't be," Jessica said upon learning about everything. "My mum died of complications from the flu when I was 3 years old. Then I was sent to an orphanage. I never had a sister, much less a twin." Paul was very puzzled, and Candice, in the meantime, was gnashing her teeth with rage. How could she not have noticed such a resemblance between this shy girl and Susan? Her memory had played a cruel trick on her. Paul, meanwhile, used all his connections and hired private investigators. They found out that many years ago, in the maternity hospital where Jessica and Susan's mother gave birth, there was a criminal scam. The midwife who delivered the mother of twin girls told her that one of her daughters had died immediately after birth. The midwife herself took the second girl and gave her to her friend, who had given birth on the same day and whose baby was born dead. The midwife's friend, of course, knew nothing about it. She brought up and raised the girl who later became Susan, Paul's first wife. Now, it turned out that Jessica, in addition to the businessman, looked after her own niece. She was surprised, but still thrilled to learn that Debbie was her niece. The only one who was not happy about the whole story was Candice. She planned to become the sole heiress of Paul's fortune, and here, in addition to his daughter, which Candice wanted to get rid of so much, she also popped up her own aunt. The former nanny was ready to do anything but stop her fool husband from dividing his huge fortune between his snotty daughter and a pregnant live-in caregiver. Candice realized that it was time for decisive action. It was necessary for Paul to take special medicines for complete recovery. So, Candice decided to substitute these capsules. In her opinion, this was the best way to get rid of her surly husband. The businessman had a severe allergy to nuts, so the wife poisoner decided to use this weakness against him. Jessica was right that Candice had a lover, and he had serious connections with the police. He was the one who advised Candice to add walnut oil to the capsules to get rid of Paul. Candice believed forensic experts would determine that the deceased ate nuts before his death, so it would be viewed as an accident, and her lover would make sure no one poked around in the case. Candice was discussing everything on the phone, as usual, locked in the bathroom. Unbeknownst to her, Jessica was standing on the other side of the door. She overheard almost the entire conversation and recorded it on her cell phone. Without wasting a minute, she rushed to Paul's office and informed him about the attempt on his life. "Oh my goodness. Well done, Candice. You cleverly thought of everything, but it was quite expected," said Paul thoughtfully. "However, we need evidence. That record isn't enough." "We can install a hidden camera in your bedroom," Jessica proposed. "We'll record how Candice adds oil to the medicine. She said she would do it with a syringe, using the thinnest needle. You won't even notice such a puncture, and after that she planned to burn the other capsules in the fireplace, so that no one could prove anything." The businessman, disappointed, shook his head. "Of course, I realized that sooner or later we would have to divorce. We are not suitable for each other, but going that far, that's beyond the bounds." Paul agreed to Jessica's plan and installed several miniature cameras in their shared bedroom on the same day. He asked the guards to keep a close watch and record everything that would happen in the room. Everything turned out exactly as Jessica had predicted. As soon as Candice had pumped the capsules with oil, police sirens were wailing outside. When they arrived, they caught Candice red-handed and obtained recordings from video cameras that clearly captured the entire process. "Paul, I beg you, you won't let these people put me in jail?" Candice wailed. "Yes, I made a mistake, but that's no reason to destroy our family, is it? We have a daughter, after all. What about our Debbie? Have you thought about her?" Police bracelets snapped on the poisoner's wrists with a loud click. "It's too late for you to remember my daughter," the businessman corrected her. "You'll have plenty of time to think about what you were going to do. In jail." The policeman put Candice in the back seat of the official car. Paul never wanted to hear anything more about this woman. The most interesting thing turned out during the interrogation. Candice's lover was the same Diego Miera, Carlos's former boss. The thread led the investigators to a major fraud, not only on the construction site, but also in the biography of the villain. Diego had been speculating with the money received from insurance on their lives of his employees for many years. That is why, wherever he worked, there were invariably accidents that led to the deaths of employees or construction workers. Now he and Candice will face severe punishment and a long prison term. After the trial, Paul immediately divorced Candice and proposed to Jessica. He believed that she was sent to him by fate and his sweet Susan. As for Jessica herself, she had long had feelings for Paul, and she agreed to become not only his wife, but also the best mum in the world for Debbie. After just a couple of months, Jessica gave birth to a healthy and beautiful boy, whom she and Paul named Timothy. The rich man immediately gave the boy his last name and officially became his father. Now, the couple, Paul and Jessica, had 2 adorable kids. They celebrated a modest wedding at home in the circle of the closest people. Now they are happy. They remember with love their deceased loved ones and try to forget all the terrible people who showed up in their lives.